The Marine Toys for Tots foster care program is bringing hope to children who need it most. Every 2 minutes, a child enters foster care, often with only a small bag of belongings. More than 400,000 children face trauma and uncertainty, many before age 8. This May, during Foster Care Awareness Month, Toys for Tots is creating Room for Joy. In 2025, nearly 375,000 children received comfort through toys, books, and essentials, reminding them they are not alone. Donate now and change a child's life.
Listen, all you New Yorkers. Excuse me, taxi. Okay, we're looking around.
This is the 77 WABC minicast.
Welcome back in the Stone Zone, right here on the Roger Stone Show. It is, of course, Mother's Day, and I can't stop thinking about my own mother, Gloria Rose Stone. Born September 20th, 1924, left this mortal coil June 6th, 2016. As the Bible says, yet those who wait for the Lord will gain new strength. They will mount up with wings like angels. They will run and not get tired. They will walk and not become weary. I'll be thinking of my mother when we have that Sunday gravy over rigatoni with some nice Chianti a little while after the show. And with every bite, I'll remember her love and her strength and her support. Joining us now is one of my favorite guests, Colonel Rob Maness, who is retired 32 years as a U.S. Air Force combat veteran, rose to the rank of colonel, but also one of the shrewdest and most informed geopolitical thinkers that I have come to know. His Substack is indispensable. If you don't follow him on Substack, I strongly recommend that you do. Colonel Maness, welcome back to the Stone Zone.
Thanks for having me on, Roger. Good afternoon and happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there.
It has been too long. So this announcement by Vladimir Putin that the Ukraine war is coming to an end, what do you think he meant like that, and what is your assessment as to what's going on in this continuing struggle between Ukraine and Russia?
I think it's a significant statement, Roger. He hasn't really been one to even lead down the road of potentially ending the conflict unless all of their strategic objectives have been met, and they continued along that storyline. But I also believe that, he sees the opportunity with President Trump in office for want of a better term, an economic deal for Russia, and more likely the opportunity for Russia to come back into the fold of the community of nations and be treated respectfully like a near peer of the United States as they once were a superpower. But I also believe that he sees this opening on the ground because, it is a grind, as you know, that with modern technology, it is a grind that is very similar to the World War I fronts, but with all of this really deadly and sophisticated and successful capability, like the drones with fiber optic lines and those kinds of capabilities. And he's taken a lot of casualties, and so are the Ukrainians, for sure. But I think all of these things are being weighed by the Russian president, but especially the presence of President Trump now back in office, and obviously they've been talking. I would expect that the president's working on a deal and it's surrounding by economics.
I mean, look, I've made this point many times, and of course I get accused of being a Russophile and so on, but Vladimir Putin made very clear from the beginning that Ukrainian membership in NATO was a non-starter. We signed two different agreements, the Budapest Memorandum and the Minsk Accords, at the time that East and West Germany were reunified, and the Russians agreed to that we would not push NATO membership in Ukraine. Of course, we've done the exact opposite under Joe Biden. And that has been a red line for Putin from the very beginning. I also saw a piece yesterday that said that Ukraine had destroyed the imagery of Vladimir Putin as a strongman. That would imply that the Ukrainians are winning. I see no evidence that either side is winning here. I just see a grind in which, unfortunately, hundreds of thousands, I guess now, of young Russians and young Ukrainians, as well as some older in the middle age, have died in an endless war that would never have started had Donald Trump been president.
Oh, you're absolutely right, sir. I get accused of being a Russophile, too, because I've always said, since before this war even started, that this playing around with the possibility of Ukraine coming into NATO was a red line for the Russians. They've said it many times openly. They've never made a secret about it. And I think, and I believe that President Trump believes that, and this is why he says this war would never have happened had he been in office, is because he was of the position that we should not be offering Ukraine a position as a member of NATO, and we shouldn't be expanding any further east. And we've expanded very much further east, going into Finland and those kind of areas, which definitely has to have the Russians looking at this and going, they have to take Ukraine off the table or nothing else is acceptable. And look, by the way, in Luhansk and Donetsk, they had elections, a vote to declare their independence out of Ukraine. So the Russians have the upper hand as far from a legal perspective. They're still a much more powerful capability than the Ukrainians have. I believe the Russians are winning. It may be in centimeters every day, but they're still taking Ukrainian territory. And that possibility is always going to be out there unless the Ukrainians come to their senses and say, look, we're going to stop our claims on the two independent states that declared independence. The Russians have annexed them already, and we're going to establish peace with our powerful neighbor because they are not going to win this. There's no doubt in my mind that the Russians are they can be in this almost indefinitely. Of course, it's a tragedy because so many hundreds of thousands of Russians and Ukrainians are dying and everything. But, when you see it opening like what President Putin just had and you're on the side, the Ukrainian side, you really ought to take a serious look at it. And that's what I hope they'll do this time. But they've passed those opportunities up that President Trump has given them many times since he's back in office because of this intransigence.
I'm curious to know about your thoughts on the future of NATO. NATO, of course, was forged in the ashes of World War II, originally as a solemn pact to stop Soviet tanks from rolling across Europe. Article 5 was the beating heart of that alliance, and it meant something then. An attack on one was an attack on all. America was, at that point, of course, strong and generous, became the shield, pouring blood, treasure, and nuclear might in defending a continent that had twice been dragged into war. For decades, it had actually worked. But after the Soviet Union collapsed, Europe turned to NATO into essentially a welfare program. While American taxpayers funded 2/3 of the alliance defense spending, wealthy European nations famously lounged around at the 2% GDP target, secure in knowledge that Uncle Sam would never ask them to pay up, but would always ride to the rescue. They built lavish welfare states on our dime while mocking American power. And then enter President Donald Trump, who, going all the way back to 1988, had been calling on our NATO allies to pay their fair share for their own defense. He refused the diplomatic double talk. He demanded fairness, and in his first term, he recovered $650 million past due dollars in dues from our NATO allies. He, of course, was viciously attacked for this by the same globalist elites who profited from this parasitic grift. My thoughts are that NATO's outlived its usefulness, but I'm not the foreign policy expert that you are. What are your thoughts on the future of NATO?
Well, look, when NATO went from a purely defensive alliance to stand up to keep the Soviet Union from taking aggressive action in Europe and on the continent there. When we went from a defensive alliance to offensive operations, the former Yugoslavia, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, all NATO out of area or offensive operations, we lost our moral high ground and credibility as a purely defensive alliance. And that's one of the reasons the Russians went into Ukraine. is because NATO became an offensive alliance, started expanding eastward the way they did, and started playing with the idea openly of Ukraine becoming a member of the NATO alliance. And because of that, it has definitely outlived its usefulness. And you add that the economic issues that you just mentioned, Roger, and they're not just their unwillingness, but their inability to participate. Look, the British couldn't even field one warship, to go protect their own territory in Cyprus when the Iran war kicked off. Not even one warship could they field, and they didn't really want to in the first place. The French turned us down. The French, the Spanish, stopped us from using their airspace. This is no longer the vaunted NATO alliance that was a key player in bringing the Soviet Union to an end. This is an alliance that's causing more problems than is necessary to have, and is actually threatening the peace on the continent of Europe. And I think that we should abolish it and set up new alliances with countries in Europe that actually want to be our allies and have a shared burden instead of be a client state or on the welfare system of the United States of America. And that is a better path to go, because this Article 5 issue is very dangerous, especially when you add the fact that we have Turkey as a member of this alliance and the major moves that they want to make in the Middle East and Persia and Southwest Asia and create this new neo-Ottoman empire is what Erdogan has said he wants to do. But they're a NATO ally. We are very fortunate that the Iran war hasn't triggered an Article 5 request by the Turks, which would completely upset the apple cart from the strategic perspective of the United States and Israel in that conflict. So I just think that it needs to be abolished, and we reset the table with bilateral treaties and agreements.
Yeah, I agree with you. The Cold War is over. The Soviet Union's gone. Yet the freeloading seems to continue. Contrast this decaying bureaucracy with the British monarchy, an institution of dignity, continuity, unapologetic national identity that has endured for centuries. Conservatives understand real tradition, rooted, hierarchical, and sovereign, not endless bureaucratic committees in Brussels centered around draining American wallets. History warns us about the dangers of unnecessary entanglements and alliances. Our founding fathers spoke extensively about it. I agree with you. I think it's time for the NATO alliance to go bye-bye. It no longer serves us. We do have countries in Europe who are our loyal allies. In some cases, they wouldn't even let us use our own bases in their countries during this attack on Iran, which is really what I want to shift to now. We have about 2.5 minutes here to this segment, and then we'll come back with more of Colonel Rob Maness. But I'm not clear. We've clearly decimated the military might, the Navy, the Army, the forces of Iran. How much longer can they continue to hold on? How much longer can they continue to attack their neighbors?
Yeah, it's always the question, isn't it? When, especially when the United States gets into a war, and this is a full industrial scale war like we haven't seen the United States get engaged in even since before Vietnam, to be honest with you. We have decimated their military. We've decimated their ability to defend themselves in any realistic way, and we've met a lot of those strategic military objectives. But we still face a defiant rump state that's run by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The government's always been run by the IRGC. I know a lot of people think the political types and the mullahs all have control and those kind of things, and they do, only in the sense that they're Islamists and they agree with the IRGC from that perspective. But it's the IRGC part of the military that really runs this, and they have a very disconnected defense system called Mosaic. So when their forces get cut off, it's why you see these seemingly random attacks on nations where you wouldn't think it would make sense sometimes, especially at the beginning of the war. And because of that system, it's very difficult to be able to tell when you have completely incapacitated their command and control and all of their military units, because they're spread out all over the place. and they had these rules of engagement and standing orders that allow them to act without any discussion with the political control in Tehran and everything. So the timing is very difficult to predict in any war, but this Mosaic defense system makes it that much more incredibly difficult to predict when they will collapse. But I will tell you this, Roger, that the economic lever and power that President Trump is wielding with the naval blockade was the absolute right decision and right strategy to take. And then this economic fury concept, where Secretary Bessent and the Treasury are going out to the banking systems, all of Iran's allies, including the Chinese, and disrupting the revenue flow into Iran, that is keeping the IRGC from paying their people. And every day that they can't pay their people, the more people they lose because they desert and those kind of things. And I predict that this regime will collapse as long as the United States maintains its resolve and continues to do the things that it needs to do militarily, like the blockade, and defending itself strongly. So there's no chance that the United States will ever appear to be weak as long as we continue to conduct military operations when it's necessary, when the IRGC either violates the ceasefire or attacks us or commits a war crime and attacks commercial shipping trying to block the Strait of Hormuz. As long as the United States continues to wield power, then they will understand that. And eventually, this regime will collapse because they're running out of money. They're losing over $500 million a day because of the oil that's not coming in and going out and being sold. The Chinese are upset because they're not getting 20% of their oil imports that they usually get. 90% of Iran's oil was being exported to China, which makes up about 20% of China's total oil imports. So the Chinese are getting squeezed, and the Iranians are getting pressured in both of those directions from their own inability to pay their people and their inability to really defend themselves anymore. It's really a joke.
All right, we're going to have to take a quick break, and then we'll be back and wrap it up with Colonel Rob Maness, so don't go away. And we're back with Colonel Rob Maness, a 30-plus year veteran of the U.S. Air Force. And if you don't subscribe to his Substack, I strongly recommend it to you. I'm going to throw you we only got about 2 minutes. What do you see as the future of Cuba, given the fact that with Venezuelan oil now going to Cuba, no longer going to Cuba, they seem to be at a real disadvantage? So give us your quick take on Cuba, if you would.
Yeah, I think they're circling the drain, Roger, and I think President Trump's got them right where he wants them, and is using that economic lever of power that started with taking the Venezuelan oil and continues because the Iranians can't get them any oil either, and with the Chinese being blocked out of the Western Hemisphere, that strategy beginning to work. The Russians are tied up in Ukraine. Then the Cubans really don't have anywhere else left to go except for the United States. And I think it's fantastic news when I heard that Marco Rubio was leading the talks and discussions with the Cuban leadership. I look forward to the day when I can go on vacation to Cuba the way Ernest Hemingway was living in Cuba when it was at least a free country anyway.
Well, I look forward to the time that you and I can have a cocktail right there in Havana, maybe at the National Hotel. Wouldn't that be great? The Cubans are duplicitous and they play for the long term, but I think they're out of cards. They're certainly out of food. They're out of gasoline. They're out of oil. They're out of car parts. They're out of all the basic necessities. As you know, my wife is Cuban American. This is something we pray about every day. Mm-hmm. I want to thank our guest, Colonel Rob Maness. Rob, where can people go to get your Substack? Please let us know.
You can just type in the Colonel's Brief on the Substack search bar, or you can follow me on X at Rob Maness and go to my website at robmaness.com. Any of those locations, you can find us all over social media.
That is Rob Maness, Maness. Thank you so much for joining us today, and God bless you, my friend.
Thank you, Roger. God bless you and your family.
All right, thanks, folks, for being with us on this solemn Mother's Day. I hope that you will enjoy your Mother's Day dinner with fond remembrance of your mothers if she has passed. And for all those mothers who are still with us, treasure them, treasure every moment with them. God bless you for joining us today. Until next week, God bless you and Godspeed.
77 WABC and Bergen Newbridge Medical Center honor the life of legendary broadcaster and our friend, Ernie Anastas.
Hi, it's Ernie Anastas. You know, your thoughts can affect how you feel. Bergen Newbridge Medical Center is the largest hospital in New Jersey, providing comprehensive, equitable, compassionate, and high-quality emergency inpatient and outpatient medical care, plus mental health services and substance use disorder treatment. The Bergen Newbridge team can address your total health needs in one convenient location. Call 201-225-7130 for an appointment or newbridgehealth.org.